English translation, 878th contact, Tuesday, 13th February, 2024, 0.36 hours.
Greetings, dear friend Edward. You got here quickly after I called you.
That's no wonder, because I was awake when you called. Ava's in hospital with Selena and Winterthur, and I can't sleep because I'm worried. It is but welcome, and also greetings, dear friend.
I suppose that's a good thing, and I think you really don't need any worries.
To that, I think it really is, but still, I'm just worried. But speaking of Selena and Ava, something has come up that is just not correct, which is why she wrote me down here that nobody should just believe, but think and decide for themselves when something is said. She refers to the fact that you gave information about what of course appeared in the corresponding contact report, what should be done about a certain thing, namely about Lyme disease. However, she says, which is absolutely correct, that this should not simply be taken as a belief, but that you should think about it yourself, and therefore think about it specifically. Unfortunately, the advice you gave was taken, but no further thought was given to the fact that something is only valid in the short term, and is useful to regulate a matter, but is not to be used acutely for life. This, just like something specific, such as vitamins, vital substances, or medication, etc., which can only be applied and used for as long as the convalescence lasts.
That is correct. It should not be believed, but really thought independently, and not make-believe thought, but make one's own insight and correct decision through one's own thought work. If only that is done which makes a statement, and if advice is given regarding an illness and this is only followed, for example, regarding which medicines, remedies, etc. are curative against it, then these should only be used for as long as they are necessary and the healing process lasts. This should always be borne in mind.
That corresponds with Eva's thoughts, which is also correct. But here I was supposed to ask this a long time ago, which I unfortunately forgot. Can you tell me the female form of these names? Arleon, Athar, Kohun, Murengol, Haraktis, and Onkaton, and there is Jendaya, for which the male name is still due.
Jendaya. This name is familiar to me, and it is used in the same form for both sexes, as is also true of the name Murengol. However, what has never been mentioned before is that the names are used differently by the peoples of our federation. In this regard, however, I can search in our name registers, which is possible in a short time, but for which I have to open the registers in my...
Yes, please.
I'm not familiar with the other names you mention regarding the feminine form, but I can see them here now. Here. Arliant, yes, here. On Era, the name is not in use, but it is recorded, where the female form is called Arlen. And here is Athar, feminine Athare. Here Kohun, the feminine form Kohuna, is given. Haraktis, both genders have the same name. Here is Onkaton, which is Onkatoni. Here is Jifa, the masculine form is Jifan, and here is Jurata, that stands for the masculine gender Jurat.
Thank you, then that is also done. But look here, this is a new work by Achim on overpopulation.
Support, petition. UN, Save the Earth, Global Birth Stop. Save the Earth, Global Birth Stop, Achim Wolf, Germany.
Creative and good. Unfortunately, only a minority of the world's population will respond to such worthy appeals. Just as they will respond to the irrationality of politics, because the resulting wrong behavior and machinations will inevitably mean that the impending disaster cannot be avoided.
Unfortunately, that will be the case. The insane behavior of the Western countries, at least the 50 or so of them, who are supplying weapons, ammunition, and money to the war fanatic Zelensky, and thus allowing the war to continue, with Germany and America, as always, standing and lurking behind everything as ringleaders and inciting the world against Russia from time immemorial, do not know what they are doing, and thus provoking. The rulers of all those countries, above all, America and Germany, the latter with the secret neo-Nazis in disguise in the government, who are not really able to think realistically and pretend and act differently from what they really have in mind, but do not yet dare to reveal their true intentions, as well as the not insignificant proportion of the misguided sympathizers and followers from the respective populations who are in thrall to them and partisan, lowly intelligent and simple-minded and non-thinking, are conjuring up disaster. As a result of their low intelligence and simple-mindedness, they are unable to think to the extent that their idiotic attitudes have not only started to create enmity on all sides, like the Russian Navalny, who does not realize in prison that he is surrounded by enemies and is no longer playing with his life as long as he has done so far, and which is already not worth a damn and will soon come to an end. However, all those non-thinking idiots who fall for the lousy propaganda of the neo-Nazis, who are truly striving for something quite nasty, are not the peaceful, free, and helpful, just like the EU dictatorship, which it makes the EU peoples and the world believe through outrageous lies to the contrary, that Germany is pretending to be. Everything will lead to the servitude of humanity if it simply allows what the superiors are striving for, and it will be much worse than it was in the times of the bailiffs, etc. AI, that is to say, artificial intelligence, will take the lead, which is already so advanced, of which the people of course know little or nothing, that it will no longer be possible to tell what is real and what is fake. It has already reached the point where, in reality and in truth, much more has already been developed in this respect than the inventors of AI were able to imagine. The reign of AI has already begun, but this is being kept secret from the people, who are also unaware of the dangerous truth that AI is already finding its way into the military and warfare. But this is denied, and nobody wants to hear or know about it, and in their indifference, the peoples are reluctant to even think about it. But when there is weeping and gnashing of teeth, the only way out is to resort to weapons that are becoming ever more deadly in their effect, and to murder and destroy for all they are worth. If we now see what is currently happening on Earth, for example, how Netanyahu's murdering and destroying by his Israeli army is being praised to the skies, thereby fueling hatred of the Jews, and how those who listen are also in favor of the worldwide begging of the megalomaniac war fanatic Zelensky, or how Putin is fully justified with regard to the war. These supporters not only fear that everything will continue like this in the future, but also that the nuclear war that is lurking in the background will be conjured up and become reality. This danger is already closer than the fallible, megalomaniacal, know-it-all idiots of the fallible governments and the parts of the population that erroneously and confusedly support them are able to think up, imagine, or simply visualize. And what I now want to bring up elsewhere is what relates to what Akim sent. The planet Earth is designed for around 500 million human beings, not for a crazy and all-destructive overpopulation that has so far exceeded 500 million 18 times over. It is idiotic, especially on the part of Putin and Germany, etc., to call on the peoples to produce many more offspring. This is despite the fact that humanity has already insanely done everything it can to overpopulate planet Earth 18 times beyond its tolerable level of 500 million human beings, and that within just 300 years. This is despite the fact that in the last 73 years alone, no less than 6,846,171,012 human beings have been born, exceeding the measure of all things. And there is no mention of the fact that this overpopulation, that is to say its completely irresponsible machinations, have exploited almost all of the planet's resources. The fact that as a result of human overpopulation, that is to say their machinations, not only the planet and all ecosystems and thus the whole of nature and its fauna and flora have been impaired, and huge parts destroyed and continue to be destroyed is of no concern to the majority of Earthlings, especially those who make money by exploiting the Earth's resources. The fact that the atmosphere is being polluted and poisoned, especially with petroleum in the form of petrol and diesel oil, is only of concern to an absolute minority of human beings on Earth. The great mass of humanity, and especially the majority of loud-mouthed rulers, are indifferent to this. So only their minority, as with the peoples, are concerned about the continued existence of all life and planet Earth. The fact that this indifference is also accompanied by the extinction of hundreds of thousands of life forms, animals, creatures, and all self-propelled life forms of many genera and species, including all genera and species of plants, starting with the lowest known flowering plant, the dwarf duckweed, up to the largest tree, the Sequoiadendron giganteum, is of little or no concern to the religious or worldly believing majority of Earth's humanity. The majority of Earth's humanity do not have their own original thoughts, because they only follow idiotic, believing illusory thoughts, so they also do not grasp the real truth and are unable to think logically, intellectually, or rationally. This is the case and will unfortunately remain so, because idiotic political calls for more offspring to be produced have exactly the opposite effect, as like-minded illusory thinkers are unfortunately in the majority. The Earth is teeming with the mindless and senseless, who are not really alive but vegetating. The majority of Earthlings do not have a highly developed personality or a truly valuable character, and remain at a low level despite a lifetime of change. The human being's personality transforms and changes throughout life, both positively and negatively. The positive wise occurs when, as a result of willing learning through free, very own and acutely conscious and also unconscious thinking, the totality of all behavioral patterns change for the better, and a human being thereby becomes a really true human being. However, this is only possible if he consciously endeavors to form his personality and character into this form willingly and consciously, and thus constantly learns in life. In the opposite, that is to say, negative case, when human beings behave in their senses and actions in such a way that they move in a form of illusory thinking, or even consciously strive for the negative, allow themselves to be indoctrinated or simply be driven by influence, all evil comes about, because then exactly the opposite of the good and therefore the bad happens. As a result, the personality and therefore also the character are formed badly because they are inevitably inferior in part, or even disastrous as a whole. The negative aspects of illusory thinking, which inevitably result from a religious or worldly belief, easily lead to indoctrination, influence and coercion, etc., as well as uncontrollable thoughts and desires, whereby evil, badness, and evil, etc., are always lurking in the depths of the character. But this is superficially covered up by the illusory thoughts of a belief. As a result, the personality and character of these human beings change in their behavior in such a dishonest, mimically tortuous, artificial and detrimental way, etc., that it becomes antisocial. However, this inevitably arises in this way in the majority of those who think in this way, especially human beings who adhere to a belief and whose personality and character are, without their knowledge, ambivalently and subliminally programmed to do evil, bad and evil without hesitation, this deeply characteristically orientated, up to revenge, retaliation, and murder, without those affected by it knowing this. What I am saying is proven beyond any doubt by ordinary human beings who simply go berserk and commit murders, as in America, for example, where over 20,000 people are killed every year with weapons of some kind. But elsewhere in the world, there are also the brutal, torturers, rabid, ruthless, violent and rage-fueled, as well as the human beings traffickers and murderers, the death penalty enforcers, criminals, mass murderers, and above all, the mercenaries and military officers who kill, that is to say, murder human beings without hesitation and without harming them. And they don't even know them, have never seen them before, and have also never spoken a word to them. For many, the joy of murder, Torture and torment is deeply rooted in their character. Or they act out of anger, revenge, and retaliation, just as the military in particular also act on criminal state orders, whereby human beings are murdered without conscience. This is truly only inherent in human beings, especially religious or secular believers. Of all people, of those who think like fools, of human beings who have programmed murder and manslaughter into the very core of their character without even knowing it. Although killing is also inherent in those creatures of the wild, they are not conscious of killing in the wise way that human beings are consciously aware of it. Because animals, creatures, and other living beings in the wild generally do this instinctively, and in a form of adaptation that is somehow peculiar to them. Because this is their natural urge to feed. This cannot therefore be equated with human beings, who even have the audacity to force animals and creatures to degenerate, become aggressive and kill by torturing and training them. The fact that this also happens to animals and creatures without any human intervention and occurs as aggression can absolutely and truly be described as a rarity. The natural behavior of animals and creatures, etc., when they behave aggressively towards human beings or other animals and creatures, has nothing to do with aggression, but is solely a matter of self-defense. Well, the character changes throughout his entire lifetime. This begins early in life as an infant. Consequently, the molding of his personality and character begins, whereby the upbringing by the parents, etc., and also the self-education and the indoctrination, impressions, experiences, etc., acting on him, bring their effect to bear. The human being reacts actively or passively to changes brought about by upbringing or external influences and Gewalt, etc., which result in, that is to say, shape his personality and character, often without him noticing, or otherwise being aware of what is deeply embedded in his character and lurking to break through to the outside world. The human being's character and personality begin to develop from childhood onwards, with caregivers and the environment, mainly parents, siblings, grandparents, schooling and experiences, imparting much of what the human being accepts. Although it is possible for genetic moments to be inherited if they are genetically deposited, which leads to physical ailments via beliefs and behavior, this has nothing to do with creation energy, through which consciousness is formed and the body is animated, which also only stores knowledge and releases it to the next new personality, which is reanimated by creation energy. This also means that rebirth is completely misunderstood and explained illusorily, because the deceased human being is never reborn, but it is only the creation life energy that revitalizes a consciousness and thus a human being when it moves into a new life form human being on the 21st day after conception and revitalizes it as a consciousness. And this gives rise to a new personality, which is also assigned an absolutely new character. The human being then forms personality and character himself, from the early age of a child and throughout his entire life. In this way, nothing is absorbed or stored by the life energy of creation, because it is absolutely only genetically that any things can be transmitted or passed on to a descendant and become effective in the next body of a new personality, in such a way that the inheritances take effect via the material body or the material brain, depending on how the human being accepts the inherited values or non-values and molds them through his own thoughts or illusory thoughts. The acute acquired values in positive or negative form are consolidated in this way as many qualities and values and behaviors that are carried over into life and brought to bear, but are also deposited in the personality and character. Character is thus formed in this way, the development of which never ends throughout life due to unstoppable conscious, unconscious, or instinctive learning. As a result, the knowledge and consequently also the character, personality, and behavior change evolutionarily, whereby the human being can improve in the course of his life as an actual human being according to his own will, learning and developing into a true human being or a monster, criminal or otherwise behaviorally deviant.
What you say overall is not to be disputed in any wise but reasonable people who understand the whole and correctly organize everything and then act accordingly will be few and far between. This is especially not the case with human beings who want to play out their might in state leadership and whose attitude is anything but balanced and peaceful. As I realized myself 3 days ago when I made a detailed effort to find out the attitude of state leaders and state foreign representatives in various states.
Aha, that is interesting. But I'm sore about that, because almost every day the German foreign minister is talking about herself, who is only about 33 years old and in my opinion has no life experience whatsoever, but who feels big and mighty and thinks she is. In addition, I think that this alone makes her unfit for her office and that her behavior is pompous, partisan, and dishonest, as well as incapable of assessing the real situation regarding Israel, Hamas, Ukraine, and Russia, which means that she cannot do justice to her office as foreign minister. But how could it be otherwise? Because being young and inexperienced brings neither wisdom nor the ability to act as she should. To me, this woman seems unsuitable for the post of foreign minister in every respect, because in my opinion, she is dominated only by delusions of grandeur, pomposity, egotism, flight addiction, and also somehow by some kind of unobjective views, judgments, condemnations, and antipathies and hostility, etc. towards those who do not suit her. At least that's how I see it when I observe and analyze the overall picture and all her behavior and speech. And this is not said or judged in any overt or covert political way or form, but simply as it is effective from my point of view, and simply states what I see and judge.
I also understand it this way, because it is indeed not to be understood otherwise. And besides, I can only agree with your findings and also explain that this woman's attitude is indeed specifically biased and hostile towards Russia. But we should not concern ourselves pointlessly with this kind of thing, because all those Earth's humanities who are not capable of recognizing reality and therefore not reality and not truth will deny the factuality you have established, and also what I have fathomed as this woman's attitude. An attitude that is so characteristic of many unjust leaders of the German state, as well as many other unjust leaders of all states on Earth, as I have found out through my in-depth investigations.
Whereby surely Switzerland is also no exception.
Unfortunately. That is indeed the case.
And these unrighteous elements are probably the ones who want to draw level with the EU dictatorship and let foreign judges rule and judge Switzerland. Because these rotten elements are willing to adopt certain laws, etc. from this dictatorship, and practically sell Switzerland to it. The Juso also play a part in this, especially those who even want to demolish Switzerland internally, because the scheduled election for a payment of the 13th AHV pension leads back to these young idiots who haven't the slightest idea about running a country, nor about the fact that accepting this nonsense would put the whole Swiss people in a lousy position.
Running a state requires not only logic, reason, and common sense, but also foresight and much more, as is also necessary to anticipate changes in nature, ecosystems, and the planet. When I think of what I read in my father's annals, that you too were far in the past in the times that made the earth look different then than it is today, how my father explained to you in advance how everything would change, I'm sure you remember a lot of what he explained to you.
Of course, for example, when I compare the Sahara with what I saw with Sfath, there's no comparison to be made, because I remember what the vast area was like back then as something completely different. It was all overgrown with greenery. There was also a large primeval forest, as well as rivers and bodies of water. Back then, it looked similar to southern Africa today, and was inhabited by all kinds of small and large and very large animals of many genera and species.
Sfath, my father, has described much of this in his annals, some of which I have already read. But here's the question in this letter, which I haven't read in its entirety, why we're only saying something about it after so many years, that we have nothing to do with the UFOs and the foreigners. Let's not go into that.
It wasn't necessary and important also, because it didn't become that until...
Well, that was really the reason that we should also pay attention to and reacted accordingly. However, it won't be good if we were to announce that.
Of course, you're really right about that, because besides, I think it is also not necessary for that to be publicized.
Yes, so let's leave it alone and just not talk about it anymore. Here's the question of the principle by which my parents called me Ptah. You're also aware of that, and besides, it was once talked about.
Yes, of course, I know that. Svath already explained to me that he picked up the name in ancient Egypt, where one of the most powerful creator gods was called Ptah, who is said to have created himself. However, your parents changed the name slightly and added an A to it, making it your name Ptah. The meaning of the name Ptah in Egypt at that time was Father of the Gods who created all life. At any rate, that was the insane belief of human beings back then. Just as today Christians, Muslims, and Jews worship an imaginary God who is said to have created everything. Unfortunately, I am unable to fathom how insane and confused a human being must actually be to believe such nonsense. In this regard, Svath and I have also discussed a lot of other crazy nonsensical beliefs, just as he has also let me see a lot and explained a lot to me. However, we have not found an answer to how crazy the human brain plays, that human beings believe, instead of thinking for themselves.
I haven't been able to read much about that in the annals. They are all handwritten and cover not only the time you were with my father, but also all his records relating to his lifetime, which I also recognize. It is only on special occasions that I can devote myself to the events in the annals that describe the incidents that you experienced together or that he explained to you. I am therefore pleased if you can sometimes tell me things in our conversations that I am particularly interested in. This is the case, for example, with regard to the meaning and purpose of the E, but also with regard to the great obelisks, which have been on the face of the earth for thousands of years. If you tell me a few things about...
But I'm only allowed to talk about that openly with you, because the obelisks that were created worldwide were energy transmitters, whereby everything was controlled from, but I'm not allowed to name that openly, which I already had to promise Svath. On the one hand, the actual centers were Atsyas, not what is attributed to them, for they were really actual installations in the form of energy generators. This, while the obelisks, as I said, were, with the main obelisk of... But I want to give you more clarity on that later, because I've already said too much, which I'll have to mark with dots for better or worse when I recall the conversation and write it down.
Of course, then there's nothing else for you to do.
But how am I supposed to comment on the questions, on the so-called UFOs of foreigners and their where from, why and where to, etc.? It is clear to me that your ancestors and those who fled from Era have always maintained that no contact was ever made with the foreigners and that you have not allowed yourselves to be located since time immemorial, and also continue to behave in this wise. And it is also good that through Svath that I am immune to this. What I promised Svath also applies in this respect. So nothing is to be said or even explained about it, for I have to keep myself as concealed as I promised. And that also applies to the other question here. As far as Svath and I are secretly doing everything, that's it. However, I will tell you.
Thank you. I knew that, but now I really understand why foreigners also keep their distance from Earth's humanity. I've never thought about that myself, but what you say seems logical to me. What my father Svath and you did together back in the 1940s, that shouldn't be mentioned openly, because that wouldn't be good or correct, because the military would...
Exactly. Unfortunately, that is the case, because violence and destruction rule this world, especially by murderous military forces of various countries, who are constantly waging war somewhere, murdering, and destroying, which is unfortunate to say the least. Murder and manslaughter are also constantly being committed through crime, strife, retaliation, revenge, and jealousy. And if I want to cite Switzerland, then, apart from the military, this is equally true with regard to what is happening among the people. The entry into force of Switzerland's neutrality in 1815, which is an armed neutrality, which is intended to be perpetual and to secure and guarantee the inviolability of Switzerland's territory, as the major European powers have agreed by treaty, prevents Switzerland from taking part in acts of war itself. But this does not suit those Swiss who enlist as mercenaries in other armies, despite the fact that this is prohibited under Swiss law. Neutrality would be good, all well and good if it were respected, but unfortunately completely irresponsible elements in the Swiss government have made a mockery of it and betrayed our expensive national neutrality by adopting sanctions against Russia from the EU dictatorship and applying them, completely irresponsibly, and without these dirty and treacherous elements being removed from the government, so that they can continue to wreak havoc against Switzerland. Just like other rotten elements who call themselves Swiss and are possibly only so-called paper Swiss, who want to make a mess of Switzerland's neutrality by any means possible, in the name of progress and the community of nations, etc., in order to let foreign judges rule over the Swiss people and their rights. Such elements are truly only rabble that are dangerous to freedom, dangerous to the country, dangerous to neutrality, and hostile to humanity. Such people never belong in any government or office, whether in Bern or anywhere else in Switzerland, because they are bereft of the true values of humanity and are only self-important and selfish. True freedom, neutrality, nonviolence, humanity, righteousness, and human dignity are just as foreign to them as respect for fellow human beings, as are independence, professionalism, privacy, openness, optimism and creativity, financial and general security, fun, happiness, perfection, kindness, compassion, perseverance, health, accuracy, family orientation, loyalty, success, trust, modesty, spontaneity, and so on. All high values, along with others, that they should first learn before they can take on a government office or official position, so that they can lead and handle it correctly. Now, the fact that war, revolt, and destruction are always prevalent on Earth is proven by the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, as well as in other areas where weapons speak or where there is otherwise stink, such as in the Red Sea by the Houthi, Americans and others. In Yemen, etc., there is also stink and armed violence, murder and manslaughter. And everything is always done under the guise of self-defense, although it is only revenge. Lust for war, lust for killing and destruction, as well as greed for land ownership, etc., but also profit and profit-seeking by the manufacturers of weapons and ammunition. There is also constant evil violence among the populations, that is to say, peoples of all countries, with murder and manslaughter increasingly becoming the daily order, as is murder by criminals and criminal organizations. But it is also the case elsewhere in the entire realm of earthly populations that violence and much quarreling, murder, manslaughter, and destruction prevail in families and in so-called circles of friends and acquaintances.
I guess we'll have to end our conversation for today, because as you hear the shouting of Bermuda here, I'm supposed to...
Good, then go. Goodbye.